In today's video, we have a little bit of everything to cover. We have some trade rumors, we have a potential suspension, we have some injuries, and a whole lot more to discuss. We'll get into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a ton of different news topics to cover today, so let's dive right in and get started. First off, Zack Kassian of the Edmonton Oilers is facing a potential lengthy suspension here by NHL player safety after an incident that took place last night against the Tampa Bay Lightning. He was tangled up with Tampa Bay defenseman Erik Cernak, and you could see a direct kicking motion where he tried to kick him with his skate, with his actual skate blade, making contact with Cernak. Obviously, doesn't look like there's any injury or anything on the play, anything like that, but still, it's a very dangerous and reckless play, something that is not tolerated at all in the NHL. We've seen a few other incidents in the past of players being suspended for kicking, and it's not something that's really looked upon very favorably. I mean, we saw a major incident, I think it was Chris Simon that was suspended for, I think it was 30 games. That was a long time ago. Jeff Skinner got one a number of years back, but it was only a couple of games, and I think Kassian right now is likely looking at somewhere around 6 to 8 games, would be my guess. He was offered an in-person hearing, which means that they're allowed to suspend for 6 or more if they choose to do so. And we also found out that Kassian apparently has rejected and waived his right to have that in-person hearing. So it's actually going to be done via phone instead of in person, which is a little bit surprising. You think he'd want to go show up and defend himself in person, but clearly he doesn't deem that to be important here. Probably realizes he's going to be suspended no matter what, but it likely will be 6+ games. I'm guessing somewhere around 7 or 8 is based on precedent that's been sent before. They're also going to factor in the fact that he's got a more recent suspension history as well. So even though he may not have done this particular thing before, they can kind of use the repeat offender rule. So I guess we'll see what happens, but this is going to be a big blow for the Oilers, who are already without Connor McDavid. To lose another forward like Kassian, who's actually planned a pretty decent season, got himself a contract extension earlier. This is not good news at all for them battling and fighting for a playoff spot. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are down below. How many games do you think is fair, and what do you think player safety is going to end up handing out to Kassian for this incident? In a separate incident, something I meant to mention yesterday, was Zdeno Chara of the Boston Bruins was fined $5,000, which is the maximum allowable amount under the CBA, for a cross-checking incident placed in their game the other night against the Montreal Canadiens, where he cross-checked Brendan Gallagher, basically got him pretty much directly in the throat, neck area, maybe made some contact with his chin as well. Thankfully for Gallagher's sake, Chara didn't seem to do it as hard as he could. Obviously, he's a huge man who was incredibly strong. If he would have hit him much harder, there probably would have been a lot more damage. No injury on the play, but I'm surprised in a way that there wasn't more made of it at the actual game. But clearly, the NHL didn't think it was suspendable, which I agree with. I don't think that's a suspendable play. If he would have been a little bit more malicious, then perhaps so. But you can see he had intent. He knew what he was doing. You can't do that and not expect repercussions. So Chara will be fined $5,000. I would like to see at some point the amounts that they're able to be fined increase, because for these guys making millions of dollars, $5,000 is chump change, and I'm not really sure that sometimes they really learned their lesson. If you look at the case of Zdeno Chara, he's made just a little bit shy of $100 million in his career, so this is not going to be hurting him at all, and I just really don't know if I really agree with the fining system that they have in place, but that's something that the NHL and the PA are going to have to hash out as part of the next CBA agreement if they choose to revisit that. Take a look at some other injury updates. Toronto Maple Leafs lost forward Andres Johnsson last night in a knee injury where he collided with a teammate, and it looks like he's going to be out for about 8 weeks. He's going to require knee surgery, so that will end the season for winger Andres Johnsson. Of course, the Leafs have been mentioned in a variety of trade rumors, as we know. Johnsson, Kerfoot, Kapanen have kind of been the trio of players that have been in the rumor mill to help them acquire a defenseman. Clearly, Andres Johnsson is not going to be a player that's traded. I can't imagine any other team wanting to pick him up after the season he's had now. He's already had other injuries this year, and this is just the icing on the cake. He's going to really limit his season. So clearly, this is another blow, though, for the Leafs, because even though they are looking to make an acquisition on defense, that still limits their trade chips they can use, and it also limits the number of experienced forwards who can produce in their lineup. In the interim here as well, they've gone through tons of adversity with injuries this year. They've also got Cody Ceci out, who could be out for the rest of the season. It's not quite clear yet. They've also got Morgan Rielly, who could be back in late March. They certainly have a lot of question marks, and those question marks will help determine, once they know the answers to what their plans are for the NHL trade deadline. On another note regarding the Toronto Maple Leafs, apparently the Maple Leafs and the representatives for Jake Muzzin are getting close to reaching a contract extension, and NHL insiders Bob McKenzie and Darren Dreger both are reporting that they do fully expect a contract extension to be reached at the very least before the deadline. It could be much sooner than that. It wasn't quite clear, but a lot of negotiations have taken place, and they do seem to be making some decent progress to lead them to think that it will happen here very soon. More likely going to be a 4, possibly 5-year deal. They haven't really talked about the amount that they're expecting on this contract, but clearly they're going to have to be a little bit creative to make it work with their cap crunch that they're facing. So Muzzin and the Leafs are quite close to getting an extension done. So not that we expected him to be traded anyway, so it doesn't really need to be done now, but the sooner it can be done, it allows the Leafs to kind of have a better outlook longer term for their cap situation, which will certainly help in whatever other defenseman that they try to make an acquisition on, because clearly there's been a lot of talk about what they might do, and it could turn out to be a player with term. And if it's going to be a player with term, it really helps to have that long-term outlook already in place so they can kind of predict what they're going to need to have available. Now jumping over to the waiver wire, which still also involves the Maple Leafs, Michael Hutchinson did end up clearing waivers, so nobody put in a claim. The goaltender who's had a bit of an up and down season, so he will be assigned to the Toronto Marlies. Not totally shocked that a team didn't put in a claim. I thought there might be one or two out there that might consider it, but clearly Hutchinson is not on anybody's radar at the present time. Now, speaking of waivers news, we have a new player on waivers. Buffalo Sabres have placed veteran defenseman Zach Bogosian on waivers. So that's something that we've heard a lot about in the trade rumor mill. The Sabres have been looking to move a defenseman for a substantial period of time. Really, it's been going on for months between Bogosian and Miller and others. Obviously, they did eventually move Scandella, but there's still at least one more going to be moved. And Bogosian's a player who had requested a trade as well. I assume that Jason Botterill has been unsuccessful in trying, and putting him on waivers might be another attempt to help facilitate his trade request. At the same time, not getting anything back in return at this point is not their big concern. Bogosian's a pending unrestricted free agent, and if he's not traded, will ultimately end up trying to look for employment elsewhere during the offseason anyway. So not a big blow for the Sabres if they lose him, but certainly a failed attempt at trading him. They're not going the route of the waiver wire. Back to injuries for a second. The Ottawa Senators also lost one of their pending UFAs, potential trade chip, and really a heart and soul member of the team, Mark Bogosian, who has been in and out of the lineup for a few injuries this year as well. Just missed some time in the last few days, took a couple games off to be with his wife when they were having their first child. Comes back and he hurt his ankle. Looks like it could be a high ankle sprain or something to that effect. He's going to be out for a longer period of time. Coach DJ Smith didn't have an exact time frame, but looks to be not a short-term thing. I'm probably looking at, based on other similar injuries we've seen and what it typically takes, I'm going to say probably 6 weeks is probably a fair assumption. Could be a little shorter, could be a little longer, but either way, Bogosian will not be in the lineup for much more of the regular season. Certainly going to make an impact, as I said, to whether or not he's traded. I do think the Sens and Bogosian both will have to get a contract done, and they do expect to hammer that out, hopefully here in the short term. I'm not really sure that he was a prime candidate to be traded, but because of the physical style and how he plays, block shots, like I said, he's a heart and soul guy. Certainly was generating some interest from around other NHL clubs for sure. So obviously that's going to turn them away now that he's going to be out for pretty much most of the regular season. Now, jumping over to a couple of NHL trade rumors I want to take a look at today. Let's start here with the Vancouver Canucks. Now, last night on TSN Insider Trading, they were talking about Michael Ferland and whether or not he'll be able to have an impact on his team down the stretch, and whether or not the Canucks will be looking to make an acquisition to acquire a player similar to what he can bring to the lineup. Now, Ferland is heading down to Utica for an injury conditioning stint. He's expected to play 2 games in the American Hockey League. If everything goes well, he's expected to be called up, which will then give him an opportunity to play a couple of NHL games before the deadline so they can kind of get a feel where Ferland is at. Now, if he's able to play that same agitating physical style of play and contribute like he has been able to before in the past, then they very well might not make a whole lot of moves at the deadline. But the Canucks are in a position where they should be a playoff team, and they're looking for some potential help if Ferland can't get back to being 100% healthy and be dependable. Of course, if the Canucks do decide to make a move, they're still linked to New Jersey Devils veteran forward Wayne Simmonds. Of course, we mentioned in the past that the Canucks had interest in Wayne Simmonds as a backup plan if Michael Ferland can't play and be relied upon into the playoffs. Of course, the Canucks are in a pretty good spot here. They want to make sure they make the most of their playoff run, and they know that they need that physical style of play. They need that physical edge, and somebody who can also, pitch in offensively as well, which Wayne Simmonds and Michael Furlan can both certainly are capable of doing. So we'll see what happens here. I don't think the asking price to obtain Wayne Simmonds would be very much. So clearly that's their plan B. Obviously, they're not likely the only team who's showing interest in Simmonds, but he's not been a name that's been overwhelming in the rumor mill, so they should be able to make that acquisition for a fairly low cost should they decide they need reinforcements. Now, lastly here, I want to take a look at the Philadelphia Flyers. Now, the Flyers had a big question mark all season, and that's the health of center iceman Nolan Patrick, who was drafted number 2 overall not all that long ago, but has really struggled with his health and his productivity at the NHL level. And, of course, he hasn't played this year, dealing with a migraine issue. And even though we've heard from GM Chuck Fletcher on multiple occasions with confidence saying that Patrick likely would play this year, it's yet to happen. Due to Patrick's absence, they are now apparently in the rental market and are considering making an acquisition and have been linked to Kings forward Tyler Toffoli as a potential trade chip here ahead of the NHL Trade Deadline. Now, we've had a lot of scouting between the Flyers and the Kings going on here in recent weeks. Former Flyers GM Ron Hextall, who used to work for the Kings prior to joining the Flyers as GM, since went back to work for the Kings and is now currently there, has been scouting the Flyers a lot, and that's what's kind of fueled a lot of the link between those two teams. And clearly Toffoli appears to be the player that makes the most sense that the Flyers would be looking at. Now, of course, the Flyers likely don't want to acquire a player with too much term, so it makes more sense for a rental player. They don't want to box out guys like Nolan Patrick or even Morgan Frost as well. They want to make sure for future years going forward here that they don't have too many guys at the center ice position who can play, because they want to give those guys an opportunity. So it makes more sense to add possibly on the wing. So it's not quite clear exactly what the package would be required to going back to the Kings to acquire Tyler Toffoli, but with the Flyers trying to get themselves into the playoffs and make the most of the season, it certainly would make sense that would be the road they would go down. Now, of course, if you're a Philadelphia Flyers fan, I'd love to know what your thoughts are. What do you think about the possibility of acquiring Toffoli, and what do you think it would be a fair package going back the other way to make the acquisition? So that is all your updates for today. I know we covered a lot, but of course, as always, we'll know your thoughts and opinions and everything down below, so make sure you leave lots of comments and we can discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.